By 2030, 85% to 90% of the 70 million Americans older than 65 are projected to have driver's licenses. That's a substantial boost from 2009 when 33 million licensed drivers were older than 65. This statistic was taken from the auto insurer AAA, and it shows that in the near future, a good majority of our drivers on the road will be elderly. Today, I'm going to be refuting the claim that elderly drivers ages 70 and older become a danger to the road. My opponent's secondary claims were that 1, elderly drivers' healthy physical state may start to decrease, and 2, elderly drivers' mental health may begin to decline. To challenge our claim, I'm claiming that elderly drivers do have the ability to drive safely, and will be backing it up with my claims that elderly drivers can monitor their health, both physical and mental state, to ensure that they can still drive. And 2, elderly drivers have a lot of options to help them keep their license. So first off, I'm challenging the advocate's evidence because it was taken from a website that was published back in 1999, which means it can be considered outdated and not current. The advocate also backs up their first secondary claim by stating that 1 in 3 people develop a vision-reducing disease by the age of 65. These are diseases such as glaucoma, cataracts, diabetic retinopathy, and age-related macular degeneration, which is also known as AMD. In response to this, I would like to say that although they may develop these diseases, there are many tests to anticipate and treat them. Testing for diabetic retinopathy is advised at early diagnosis of onset diabetes, as well as annually to make sure and keep track of any future possible diagnosis. And according to the National Eye Institute, risk for AMD can be reduced by avoiding smoking, exercising, maintain normal blood pressure and cholesterol levels, and eat green leafy vegetables and fish. AMD and cataracts can also be tested regularly when you go for your local appointment or your yearly appointment with your optometrist, with the visual acuity test, dilated eye exam, fluorescein angiogram, and optical coherence tomography. Cataract surgery is also one of the most common operations performed in the U.S., according to the National Eye Institute, and in about 90% of the cases, people who have had the surgery have better vision afterwards. My opponent's next piece of evidence was that elderly drivers have a smaller field of view, which means that they can get distracted easier, and they also have issues seeing close up and far away. The California DMV website actually gives the following advice. 1, you can turn your head frequently to compensate for decreased peripheral vision or field of view. 2, add a larger rear view mirror to increase your field of vision. And 3, look ahead of your vehicle to anticipate any trouble. Also, to address the fact that elderly drivers might have problems seeing close up and far away, anybody can go into their local optometrist or store and get glasses for nearsightedness and farsightedness. My opponent's next secondary claim was that elderly drivers' mental health may begin to decline. Their evidence was that older people are more prone to Alzheimer's, dementia, and depression, which can affect their driving ability. The issue with this reasoning is that they provide no statistical data that proves that all or even a majority of older people are affected by these illnesses. The California DMV website also states that unlike senior drivers with motor function or vision impairments who tend to self-restrict their driving, senior drivers with dementia will continue driving even when it's unsafe for them to do so. The important thing to remember about many cognitive impairments is that they are progressive. Early diagnosis and treatment is vital to ensure that you'll be able to drive as long as possible. As long as your condition remains mild, you should be able to continue driving. However, once the condition reaches a moderate or severe stage, it is too dangerous for you to keep driving. They also advise that older drivers aren't immediately removed from the road because they have an illness. As long as it's manageable and mild, elderly drivers are still able to operate a vehicle. They can actually have tests done, which are called the Supplemental Driver Performance Evaluation, SDPE, or an Area Driving Performance Evaluation, which means that they are tested to see if they have any impairments or anything, and they can actually be restricted to driving in certain areas so that they don't get their license taken away. Lastly, the advocate uses an example from a TV show where an elderly driver had such a strong need to drive that they ended up getting into an accident and hurting other people. Now, this was a good example because elderly people do feel the need to be independent. However, TV shows are fictional and are made for audiences' entertainment. There does in fact exist an issue where elderly drivers are worried about losing their independence, and I'd like to use the following statement from the DMV website to conclude. As a senior driver, being told you have to take a driver's test probably makes you think you're about to lose your independence. This is not necessarily true. DMV does not have different licensing standards for senior drivers. It is in an individual's mental and or physical condition or his or her inability to follow traffic laws and rules regardless of age that determines whether DMV renews, restricts, suspends, or revokes a driving privilege. This statement is the first thing that a person sees when they search up how an elderly driver can keep their license on the DMV website. So to conclude, elderly drivers may develop mental and or physical diseases or illnesses that affect their driving. However, this does not mean that they become a danger to the road. My opponent's secondary claims that their physical and health state may begin to decline are true, but they are also manageable, and many elderly drivers up to the age of 90 years old are still fully capable of operating a vehicle. Thank you.
All right, structurally everything is fine. You give us a general idea about what your argument's going to be as you get to the individual points. On the first point, you challenge the evidence that the advocate uses for being old, and then you present us with information about all of the vision problems that they talked about and how those can be managed or mitigated to some degree. That seems like a pretty reasonable response on these particular points. I don't understand why why some of these things couldn't be true. Now, there might be some issues that do create problems. I like the fact that the DMV also has suggestions for addressing some of those kinds of problems that are being presented, and that the DMV doesn't see that your license needs to be pulled under those circumstances as long as you have made an appropriate adjustment. I think that's a good comparative piece of information. They're the people who usually judge whether or not somebody is competent on the road, and that's the criteria that we ought to be going by rather than the innuendo of somebody who is using old evidence. I think you want to make the contrasting argument sometimes to do that. On the mental health issue, I think essentially, if somebody does have a problem, a severe problem with dementia or a moderate problem with dementia, you acknowledge that they could be a potential danger on the road, but you also point out that the advocate didn't show that there was any information to support this, that it's just largely based on general trends, and there isn't any documentation about more frequent accidents as people have gotten older or anything along those lines. Your responses on this point, I thought, were a little bit less convincing. I mean, they basically say, if you do have more moderate or severe things, you shouldn't be driving anymore, and they accept that as a principle. I thought that the good argument here was that the DMV has a way to test people for this, alternative ways of testing people, and that they can suggest limited ways in which the elderly can drive in those circumstances. I thought that was fine. The general criticism of the television show example is okay, but once again we're back to the same issue, and that is, are the drivers capable of driving? And I think we need a little bit more statistical information here. I don't remember that the advocate had information that showed that drivers over a particular age are producing a greater number of accidents or fatalities than any other age. Maybe they are. Like I said, I don't remember. But if they did present some evidence like that, you need to confront it. And if you have any evidence that suggests there's no significant difference, that would be good to present here on that point as well. All right.